Welcome back to another video, guys, and today I'm going to show you guys how to mix vocals for metal. Before we get to the tutorial though, if you'd like for me to mix your music, shoot me an email at divinemotherstudios@gmail.com with details of your project. I'd love to hear from you guys. Alright guys, so I'm making this video because I am currently in the midst of editing my band's last song for our upcoming album, and I thought it'd be really cool to show you guys how I'm going to potentially mix the vocals, since my understanding of how to mix vocals has evolved since a couple years ago. And I just wanted to show you a couple mixes where I think this really showcases how to mix vocals in a way that gets them to be upfront in the mix and above a bunch of distorted guitars and very heavy drums. Just so that you guys understand, the name of the game when it comes to mixing vocals for metal is 100% going to be compression. You need to have gobs and gobs and gobs of compression to make sure that your vocals are going to be up to that pro level standard. I used to struggle with this so much, but I was very afraid to use tons and tons of compression, almost like if I was afraid to break the plugin on my vocals. So that being said, my favorite compressor to accomplish this is going to be the CLA 76 by Waves. And the cool thing is about this plugin is that when you slam this motherfucker, it's going to give you tons of distortion and saturation in a very, very cool way that adds to that kind of grittiness that we need in our vocals for metal. So let me just play you this song that I got going on here, and let's just take a listen to how the vocals sound. So there is tons of compression going on here. You can actually hear some distortion happening, and there's some other stuff that under the hood that I'll show you guys in a little bit that is happening. So the way I have this compressor set up is a bit unusual for me. It's something that I usually don't do. Usually I have the release somewhere in the middle like this, but I have the slowest attack and then I have the slowest release. And the reason for that is because I want the attack to be very slow so that it can emphasize the front part of the phrase, but then the release also slow so that all these little spikes in the back here are being controlled by that release and not allowing the attack to just jump up because it's so slow. So let me quickly just solo the vocals, and let's just take a listen to what the compressor is doing, bypassed and unbypassed. You're too afraid to risk what's familiar. Another day has come. So as you can tell, when I bypassed it on that second half here, it lost a ton of its energy. It almost sounded like he was actually losing his breath and wasn't pushing as hard into the microphone. And especially in that tail end there, you were hearing some of those spikes kind of jump up again. So let's listen to that again, just one more time. What's familiar? Another day has come. So it's still letting some of that front end attack from the phrases go through, but because the release is so slow, it's containing them in a way that sounds pretty good. Now, I have learned over the years that I like to EQ into my compression. So usually what I do is I set up my compressor, doing anywhere between 10 and 20 dB of gain reduction. And then from there, I like to EQ into that compressor. The reason being is that I have found that you can get away with a ton more EQ than you normally would if the EQ was to come after the compression. Now, when it comes to EQ, I'm a pretty simple guy. Usually around 7.5K to 8K is where a lot of the air is that I look for. Anywhere between 2K and 4K is going to be a lot of the intelligibility. So I'm boosting quite a bit of that here, about 8 dB of 2.5K. Not really doing anything in the mids, although sometimes you do have to watch the 500 hertz area. And then everything below 185 hertz is being reduced by about 2.5 dB with a low shelf. So instead of a cut, it's just kind of just bringing it down like this. And I also have compression going on this compressor as well. I have a very fast release and a very fast attack. So I'm emphasizing the front end attack of the phrases with this compression. You're too afraid to risk what's familiar. And let's bypass the entire plugin to hear what we got. You're too afraid to risk what's familiar. So it loses a lot of its intelligibility and forwardness without that EQ in there. And also this compressor is really, really helping as well. If you notice that although this is doing the majority of the work, this extra first stage of compression being added by this compressor here is giving it even more energy up front in the mix. And then honestly, I just have that copied over to the other 3 tracks, except for this one. This one's a little bit different, but I'm not going to get into that today. The next thing I want to talk about is saturation. And the problem is, if you're having trouble getting your vocals to sit in the mix, it's a combination of not enough compression and not enough saturation. Saturation, what it's going to do is just make the vocal more than what it already is. And it's going to introduce these harmonics that make it sound louder than it actually is in real life. So I'm going to go ahead and play the mix for you with the saturation, and then just pay attention to this little yellow knob. When you see that come up, that just means that it's been bypassed. So if you guys really were paying attention there, it just sounds a little bit louder, it sounds a little bit thicker, and a little bit more in your face. When I bypassed this, the vocals thinned out just ever so slightly and kind of fell back just a little bit behind the mix. Now, saturation is about 10% of the sound of your vocal mix, EQ being about 10% of that sound. 80% of your vocal mix is going to be compression. So I implore you guys, do not be afraid to use compression in your vocal mixes, because that is ultimately what's going to lead you guys to success. Okay, so let me show you guys a different vocal mix that I have going on here. This is a song that you guys have seen featured on my channel many times already, but it is one of my favorite vocal mixes that I have done. But if you're new, let me just play you guys the mix very quickly, and let's go ahead and dive in. So a completely different tonality. The other guy had more mid-range and had a bit more of a higher kind of quality to him. This guy is really, really low and has a lot more of that gritty kind of throaty sound to him. And I really wanted to emphasize that. Now, if you guys notice, unlike the other performance, this performance, I can clearly tell that there was no compression on the way in when it came to tracking. There's tons of peaks and valleys on this performance, just everywhere. And that is not gonna work when it comes to this kind of genre. So, unlike the other vocal mix where I would just EQ into compression, I'm actually starting with compression right off the bat. Hush, now my dear, close your eyes. So I'm doing about 6 dB of gain reduction with this RVox compressor from Waves. And then after that, I am following it up with my typical SSL channel EQ. 7.5K, I'm boosting about 6 dB. I'm boosting around 4K for that intelligibility. And then around 185 Hertz, I'm reducing it by a dB and a half. Now, I do also have compression going on the channel strip here, and it is set up differently than the previous example. Because there has so many spikes and valleys here, I want to be able to control all of those spikes that are happening before I hit my main compressor. So to do that, I have a fast attack engaged on this compressor, doing about 3 to 6 dB of compression, so that when it does hit my main compressor, it's not making it freak out and have this weird artifacts and over compression happening. Hush, now my dear, close your eyes and let the darkness fill the skies. The stars have fallen, the moon's gone away. It's just you and me. So in your mind, you may think, hey, that sounds a little thin, but honestly, it's just the way our ears perceive what's happening. If you really notice, I'm not really taking out a ton of low end, and it really comes down to these 2 EQ moves, giving you the perception that there's less low end than there actually is. And then I'm following that up with the standard 1176 compressor that I usually go for. Hush, now my dear, close your eyes and let the darkness fill the sky. And I'm doing almost 20 dB of gain reduction. So I have tons and tons of compression on this guy as well. And I'm just following all of that up with a limiter to catch any of the crazy peaks that may be getting through the compressor. Hush, now my dear, close your eyes and let. So it's really only acting on the offending peaks there. And as usual, I have tons of saturation and distortion happening as well. And now I'm gonna play you guys the full mix with this running, and then I'm gonna bypass the plugin in the middle of the mix so you guys can hear how much this is affecting the vocal mix. Now, there is a slight volume boost, but don't let that fool you. It definitely loses a lot of the vibe when I have this plugin bypassed and unbypassed. So that's really how I would go about mixing vocals for metal. You just want to have tons and tons of compression, a pretty healthy amount of saturation, and I would do this all in staged versions. So I would go ahead and then EQ into that compressor, and then follow up that compression with any de-essing and limiting, with the final thing being some saturation at the very end to kind of just glue all of those elements together. If you're finding that you're having trouble getting your vocals to sit in the mix, again, it's gonna come down to not using enough compression and saturation. And I implore you guys to just not be afraid and just slam your compressors so that you guys can get that amount of compression that you need to get those metal vocals to be right up here and in the listener's face. So if you enjoyed this video, give me a like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.